With the current state-of-the-art science and technology, even the most skilled experts seem unable to fully understand the energy amplification effect of gravity reactors. So this movie will give an intuitive explanation that even elementary school children or monkeys can understand. However, when talking about energy, you must first understand torque, which is the most important element. People who like cars and motorcycles have some idea of what torque is, but the general public has heard of it. But even adults with science backgrounds don't really understand its essential elements. As first step to explanation about torque in a way that even elementary school children can understand. Torque is just one expression of an extremely simple element that indicates the force of rotational power. However, various mechanical systems always have many rotating parts such as gears and pulleys, and in order to transmit the appropriate power and operate the machine functions properly, the mechanical system will not operate properly unless the characteristics of torque are understood in detail. For example, to run a car, the torque generated by the engine is used. And to generate electricity with a generator, if the appropriate torque is not continuously applied to the rotating shaft of the generator, everything will stop immediately. In other words, it is no exaggeration to say that modern human society is powered by the energy that generates an appropriate torque and continues to apply that rotational power by the torque energy. In most cases, how this simple yet important rotational power, torque, is generated is by converting general, linear kinetic energy into rotational power energy. It is virtually unknown that during this important conversion process, large and unavoidable losses occur. For example, there is a commonly used gear set called a rack and pinion gear that converts linear power into rotational power. And we will use this to conduct an experiment to convert linear power into rotational power. And then it has been found that there is a huge conversion loss of 36%, which most of people could never have imagined. Even gear experts say that this gear set has a large mechanical friction resistance. But the main cause of the loss is not the mechanical friction resistance, but the significant increase in the time and distance over which the same force is continued to be applied. If we take into account the actual mechanical friction resistance, the distance and time over which the mechanical friction resistance is applied will also increase. And the loss rate will increase even further. However, there is a phenomenon that creates a big misunderstanding that makes it necessary to conclude that this conversion loss is mechanical friction resistance. This is because, in a very similar situation, if you use a pulley action, the same force can be generated with the same force in the opposite direction. It is true that pulleys do not have as much mechanical friction as gears, so it is understandable that the torque conversion loss is considered to be mechanical friction resistance. However, once the power line or belt contacts on the pulley more than 180 degrees in the circumference of the rotating body, pulling force has been already torque force, so there is no conversion loss to begin with. This sensory misunderstanding occurs. Incorrect assumption delays the elucidation and understanding of the true cause, and is likely to lead to even greater misunderstandings. In the experiment mentioned earlier to convert linear kinetic energy into torque power with a rotation angle of 90 degrees, even an elementary school student can see by observing with simple experimental equipment that the cause of the 36% loss is simply because the distance and time of pressure application extended. The issue is whether it is possible to continue to provide a constant acceleration over a 360 degrees rotation range in order to form circular motion. The strength and direction of the power at any instant of circular motion are expressed as sine waves. But the rotational range in which pressure, or acceleration, can be applied in a certain direction is limited to 180 degrees out of 360 degrees. And in the case of acceleration exceeding the acceleration of gravity, the effective acceleration rotational range is limited to 90 degrees in order to reduce losses, and must be narrowed to 1/4 of 360 degrees. In other words, logically, the loss of converting to 360-degree circular motion increases to 84%. And there is currently no mechanical technology that can eliminate this. But even without taking into account mechanical friction loss, why does such a large loss occur? If there was such a large loss, the fuel efficiency of automobile manufacturers and the transformation efficiency of power plants would all be lies. It's no wonder that people say that there is no way anyone could believe something like that. In the first place, when it comes to energy-related calculations, this simple principle of kinetic energy that even an elementary school student can understand is not taken into consideration at all. Many of these are calculated using complex differentiation and integration based on the Joule formula for heat, a formula created by the great 18th century physicist Joule. So it doesn't matter whether the calculations contain falsehoods or errors. In the real world, the more complex the calculation process, the more likely it is that there will be errors in the results. And for better or worse, the results will be far removed from reality. Regarding torque conversion in an internal combustion engine of a car, this is a very easy to understand model to show the actual torque conversion loss. All internal combustion engines have 4 unavoidable processes: sucking in fuel, compressing it, expelling it, and exhausting it. These processes are definitely separated by a 90-degree change. In each process, the linear motion of the piston, called the piston motion, is converted into rotational energy. The only linear energy used as power is the linear pressure force from the explosion. All other processes are only affected by friction loss energy. It is often said that you should use the engine brake when braking on a long slope. But that strong braking force is also a reverse use of torque conversion loss. In thermal and hydroelectric power generation systems, very robust and heavy turbine systems must be rotated at high speeds. This is because the negative chain mechanism, which requires an increase in the amount of wasted energy in the form of released energy, that is, exhaust energy, has become more advanced in order to rotate heavy and robust multi-blade turbines at high speeds. This is because the high compressed pressure will contribute to a slowdown in the turbine itself. Unless the torque energy is instantly absorbed and immediately released, the basic structure of a high-speed turbine system has not changed at all from the water wheel turbine systems that have been around for thousands of years. The oldest type simply uses gravity, converting that potential energy into rotational power, but there were issues with this, such as the water wheel being damaged if the original amount of water flowing was not reduced. and the water wheel being unable to absorb much potential energy unless it was turned at a slow speed, as it was unable to store much water. In either case, the absolute amount of energy obtained was extremely small. In addition, with this structure, it is not worthwhile to scale up the unit or build many numbers up, so it has evolved into a high-speed rotation type with a pressurization process added. The basic idea of this old high-speed rotation structure has not changed at all from the current turbine system, and it is obvious that to obtain high output energy, the torque conversion energy is obtained by shallowly contacting a fluid such as pressurized water flowing at high speed, like applying a light brake. You may say that in today's high-tech human society, it is impossible to make such an inefficient system even more inefficient. However, this is an experimental system that even an elementary school student can easily understand, and it is better to logically change your perception after seeing the undeniable reality. For example, if it is rotated only by the force of gravity, or by gravitational acceleration, the turbine rotation speed is slow. And if the water pressure due to gravity decreases and falls below the torque conversion loss, the turbine will stop rotating. If stable pressurization is applied from the outside without relying on gravity, the fluid speed in contact with the turbine will increase. And torque that rotates the turbine at high speed will be generated along with the released energy. If even higher pressure is applied, high torque energy will be generated along with the released energy, but it is obvious that most of the pressurized energy is converted into released energy. Looking at this action, it is clear that in order to measure the torque converted energy, it is much easier and more accurate to measure the amount of physical energy of the released motive power than to measure it from the input energy and analyze the dispersion of various thermal energy conversions within the system. To put it in terms that even elementary school students can understand, the recoil energy when a firefighter sprays water is very strong. And the firefighter who holds it with his teeth clenched requires incredible physical strength. It is true that up to 16% of the pump output that generates this powerful released energy is consumed as torque conversion energy, and the remaining 84% or less of the motive energy is used to release water. In other words, it is self-evident that even if you try to generate electricity from the tremendous force of the water sprayed, only 16% of the torque energy can be converted into electrical energy. There are quite a few scientists who say that internal combustion engines in automobiles are overwhelmingly more efficient than other engines and electric motors. This can be easily understood when looking at well-to-wheel efficiency, in other words, the overall energy consumption efficiency from the oil field to the wheel power. In Europe, a few years ago a law was passed to abolish internal combustion engines and replace all engines with electric motors to make electric vehicles. But this law is being rescinded as it has become clear that the EV shift will result in losses both to the natural environment and the economy. However, while it is said that this loss is due to the inability of battery performance to keep up, the fundamental problem is that torque conversion efficiency was ignored. Just like with internal combustion engines, the power generation efficiency of a power plant varies infinitely depending on the combustion method, pressure, and fuel. And the application of the Joule heat formula changes infinitely. However, the torque conversion efficiency that produces high-speed rotational power is constant in physical dynamics, at most 16%. If you include the unavoidable processes of generating, transmitting, distributing, and charging electricity at that efficiency, which incur significant losses. Even an elementary school student can see that no matter how high performance the battery is, it cannot contribute to ecology at all, and is simply a waste of time and money that is not worth it in terms of convenience or economics. However, energy-related calculations involve major national policies and vested interests. And there is fierce competition in technological development in various fields. The reality is that it is important infrastructure that has been built using complex and advanced theories and at enormous development costs. So it is not easy to point out the irrationality with simple logic. In a world where thermal power is the mainstream, there are many different thermal theory calculating methods based on Joule heat formulas for energy-related calculations. But only mechanical engineering experts can accurately recognize torque conversion efficiency. If we go into this field in depth, it also becomes extremely complex, requiring advanced knowledge and calculations, and it is a field that even ordinary people with a science background cannot easily understand. So it may be inevitable that it is not given much importance in a field where combustion efficiency is considered to be the most important. Incidentally, because of the Joule heat formula, the existence of perpetual motion machines is completely denied, but over 2,300 years ago, the famous as the ancient wise man Archimedes invented a snail-shaped pump system that generates positive hydraulic power in excess of potential energy. And this pump system is still used today as a highly efficient pump. Also, 2,000 years ago, Heron, who invented the steam engine system, invented Heron's fountain, a perfect perpetual motion machine with a simple principle that uses gravity and air pressure, and although it is now easy for anyone to reproduce, it has not become very famous. These pump systems have succeeded in generating pumping energy that is several times the potential energy of gravity. But they have not yet reached a system of torque amplification that compensates for the torque conversion loss required for power generation and overwhelmingly exceeds this, and as a result, it is thought that the existence of perpetual motion machines is not recognized. So far, many of fundamental logics were explained the actual principles of torque in a way that even an elementary school student can understand. But torque transmission technology is an extremely important element in human society, and so many models and examples were explained in a flash and it may seem confusing. However, if you can slowly and clearly understand each one, it will be sure that you will realize that if there is a way to eliminate torque conversion losses and create a torque amplification device, all of our current energy problems can easily solve. To reiterate, torque requires extremely difficult knowledge and theory to build complex mechanical systems. But it is just only a quite simple one of power elements that even a monkey can understand if the complex mechanical system elements take away. The torque amplification principle of the gravity reactor is the completely opposite concept of the currently mainstream high-speed turbines. It is a turbine system of a different dimension, developed with the intention of storing and retaining more water by minimizing the rotation speed of the turbine, theoretically increasing the torque infinitely. However, while the amount of water that can be temporarily stored increases by simply slowing down the rotation, but the torque control load adjustment function is inevitable to extract stable torque energy. Without this control, the more water stored, the more torque is released all at once unstably, and stable torque energy cannot be obtained. So the system concept could be corpus and shift to higher speeds, repeating a negative chain reaction. However, the Trinity warp turbine system, which is made up of 3 warp turbine blades that solves all of these issues with a simple structure and function. This can also be called a flux capacitor turbine, as it is equipped with a warp gate system that jumps over the limit angle band to other warped space. However, just because using such 4-dimensional keywords, you would not be able to fully understand its principles and effects, so the simple animation showing how it works the principle of the demonstration machine that has already been completed. From the time the water starts flowing in until the water accumulation reaches the critical water level, the maximum torque is not generated immediately. But once the critical water level is exceeded, the maximum torque is always generated. The maximum torque generates this stably with the warp gate system functioning. The water that exceed critical level jump across space and remain in another space. And the center of gravity of the weight of the total amount of water always produces heavy and stable torque output as a result. Also, since the torque conversion is 100% not the momentum of the falling water but the weight of the naturally accumulating water, and you can see that there is no torque conversion loss. This natural torque increase due to gravity is chain reacted with the warp turbine and warp gate system by the compound interest amplification effect of gravity. And according to actual physical mechanics calculations, if it compares the force of the running water to the force of torque created by the weight of the water stored in it, it goes 100 times stronger as powerful in all range. More specifically, if the warp turbine is 1 meter in diameter and 1 meter in length, and the inflow water volume is only 8 liters per second, 145 kilowatt-hours of energy can be generated per hour. It is said that a single reactor at a nuclear power plant can generate 1 million kilowatt-hours of electricity per hour. So 7,000 gravity reactors of this size would be enough to meet this demand, making it clear that they are highly practical. However, there is one important concern. That is, if the energy of circulating the water of the trigger pump is greater than or very close to the output energy, it is completely meaningless. However, it has been confirmed that to pump 8 liters of water to a height of 1 meter per second, a pump of the same output for a large ornamental fish can achieve the same output at 300 watt-hours. Furthermore, by partitioning the warp turbine unit into a simple sealed space, the volume equivalent exchange action of air pressure and water pressure can be used like the principle of a siphon. And the required pump energy is small, less than a small percentage of that, so there is no need to worry about this at all. Therefore, once the gravity reactor is activated, it will continue to amplify and generate enormous energy semi-permanently through the action of time and gravity, unless the slight water flow caused by the trigger pump is stopped. This is because it is the same principle as the Earth's rotation not stopping. However, if the true figures regarding energy were clearly shown, there would be many elements that deny the highly complex thermal energy technology. and it would be the target of hostility from the perspective of the complex science and technology that supports the current social infrastructure. And there is a risk of being criticized like Galileo's heliocentric and geocentric theories. But the inventor wanted to take this opportunity to reveal the truth. But in the case of the gravity reactor, perhaps because the truth and evidence were so clear, even in today's world of social media where slander is rampant, not a single critical voice has been raised, even though serious issues concerning the survival of human society in the current energy crisis have been raised. The general public may leave all scientific matters to experts, but experts may have no choice but to turn a blind eye to logic that even an elementary school student can understand, which leaves no room for debate. In any case, observing this situation, it may be that monkeys, who cannot even understand numbers in arithmetic, have overwhelmingly superior sensory intelligence, such as the difference in strength and how to use it, and are able to understand things faster than humans, whose thinking is paralyzed by the excessive use of tools and machines. The physical structure of this technology itself is not that difficult, so as long as you understand the principles, some trial and error will be necessary. But if you take the time to work on it and try and error, you will be able to produce reasonable results. Also, as the inventor, it would very much welcome the challenge of copying this technology and developing even more efficient systems based on it. This is because the inventor has no intention of monopolizing this technology and wants to spread it to the world as soon as possible. However, this technology is deeper than it looks, and it is not easy to understand. It will be quite difficult to understand the fundamentals, but it will surely reveal eye-opening truths and useful truths one after another. Furthermore, for experts with cutting-edge scientific knowledge, understanding such a primitive mechanism may be difficult due to preconceived notions. No matter what field you are an expert in, the more primitive the subject, the more outside your field of expertise it is. The more excellent experts in the highly complex fields of thermal and nuclear power gather to analyze such a primitive unknown field by past achievements, the more the burden of time, effort, and cooperation required for development will multiply synergistically, and it is clear that even after 100 years, they will not be able to create even a decent prototype. If even just a few people do not follow the current evolutionary trend, but have the courage to eliminate complex fundamental elements, use already mature mechanical technology, and regain some of the instincts of apes, there will surely be an opportunity to break away from the current closed society that relies on thermal power and create a new civilization.